The water smelled of earth and pine as it rushed past the rocks at the edge of my land, and for years I had loved the sound of it whispering through the trees like a secret song I alone understood, but that morning the song was drowned out by the crackle of paper in my shaking hands, a letter thick with menace, its bold words screaming louder than any river. I read it once, then again, my stomach twisting tighter each time until the black ink seemed to blur together. Notice of violation. Unauthorized structure fine $50,000. The word struck like a hammer, and the kitchen chair creaked beneath me as if it too could not bear the weight of what I had just learned. $50,000 for building a dam that had not harmed but saved for every storm that had threatened the neighborhood. The barrier I built had held back the floods, protecting their polished lawns and precious driveways. But gratitude had never arrived in my mailbox, only this. I walked through my property, trying to calm the storm. Inside me, the dam stood strong, carved from stone, and sweat a wall of labor against the chaos of water. I remembered the weeks of work, the blisters on my palms, the mud in my boots, every ache worth it, when I saw the runoff settle harmlessly instead of tearing through homes. Yet now the same people I had protected were sharpening their knives. The next day, I entered the HOA office, a room that smelled of lemon polish and arrogance. Claudia Whitmore presided from behind a desk, her pearls glowing against her throat, her smile thin, and cruel, her eyes sharp as glass. She looked at me like a bug pinned under glass. "Claudia," I began, holding up the letter, "this fine makes no sense. The dam is not a danger. It keeps your homes from drowning." She leaned forward, perfume filling the air, a scent too sweet, too heavy. "Rules are rules. You did not seek approval from the board." My jaw tightened. Approval would have taken months, and storms do not wait for meetings. Your garage would be filled with water, if not for me. A man in suspenders chuckled from the corner, his belly shaking. "Maybe next time you will learn to ask permission." Claudia tilted her head, her pearls shifting like a crown. $50,000 is generous. Pay it, or we escalate." I felt heat rise up my neck. "You are punishing me for helping." "No," she said, her voice coated with sugar. "We are punishing you for believing you are above us." Her words stung deeper than the fine itself. This was not about rules. It was about power. She wanted me bent, broken, humiliated, a warning to anyone else who dared to act without her, blessing the smirk on her lips, told me she was already savoring my defeat. I left the office, the echo of their laughter following me like footsteps on my back outside. Neighbors whispered, some with pity, some with judgment. Curtains, shifted eyes peered from behind blinds, but none of them spoke loud enough to matter. At home, I sat by the window, watching the river glimmer. Under the fading sun, the dam stood proud, unbothered by their threats. It held steady. Because I had built it steady, every stone set with care, every line of earth packed with purpose. And I thought of Claudia, her pearls, her smirk, her belief that rules were chains she alone could tighten. My fists clenched. I could feel the calluses against my palms. They believed I was trapped. They believed I would pay, kneel, beg for mercy. But mercy had died the moment they called my work an eyesore and my labor a crime. The dam still stood, and so did I, but storms were coming, storms of water and storms of justice, and I was not the one who should be afraid. The days that followed blurred together in a storm of paper threats and gnawing rage. Every sunrise brought another letter from the HOA, their words colder, sharper each time. Talk of liens on my property, threats of legal action, the fine swelling like a tumor, until I could hardly breathe. Each envelope felt less like ink on paper and more like a hand tightening around my throat. Claudia was not satisfied with victory. She wanted me broken. One evening, as I shoveled stew into my mouth, the phone rang. Her voice oozed through the speaker, sweet as spoiled honey. "Tick-tock, every day you delay it, the fine grows. Soon you will wish you never lifted a shovel." I slammed the phone so hard the table rattled, the screen cracked, and the stew went cold, her laughter still echoing in my ears. Even after the call, and as she enjoyed this, she fed on it. I told myself I would fight them with reason. I gathered documents, rainfall charts, photographs of past floods. I spoke with neighbors whose basements had once been rivers before the dam existed. Some nodded. Quietly, some signed statements, not many, but enough to give me hope that truth might matter. I carried the evidence like armor to the next meeting. The board sat at their long, polished table, faces smug in a glow of fluorescent light. Claudia stood in the center, her posture regal, her pearls gleaming, her smirk practiced. "Ladies and gentlemen, this so-called dam is nothing but vanity. It violates regulation. If we allow this what is next chicken coops, junkyards, chaos, we must uphold order." I rose, my heart hammering. I showed the photos, the signatures, the proof. "This dam saves your homes. Without it, the storm water destroys everything you cherish. I built it for the good of the neighborhood." Laughter broke around the room. Sharp, cruel Claudia raised a hand for silence, her gaze slicing into me. Do not be fooled by his theatrics. The longer this continues, the more his fine grows. He drags down property values. We must be strong. The board clapped like trained dogs. I stood alone. Shame and fury tangled in my chest. I wanted to shout to break their table, to shake sense into them. But I walked out instead, each step loud enough to echo off the sterile walls. Outside rain began to fall, the sky dark and heavy. As if mocking me, I drove home with fists gripping the wheels so tight my knuckles went white. That night the storm raged, water pounded the roof, and the dam held as always it held steady against the flood. I watched from the window, lightning flashing across the horizon, and I thought of Claudia safe in her house dry. Because of the structure she despised, I wondered what would happen if it was not there, if the water took its true course, if her basement filled like so many before hers had. The thought came uninvited, but once planted it grew. What if they saw what the world looked like without my dam? What if they drowned in the very arrogance they wielded against me? The next day a deputy knocked on my door, papers in his hand, his face impassive. "They're suing you," he said flatly, "50,000 plus legal fees." I laughed not from humor, but from disbelief. The sound bitter scrape in my throat. They were not defending order. They were not protecting property values. They were crushing me, because they wanted my head mounted on their wall of warning to anyone else who thought they could act without bowing first. That night I sat by the dam, the river swollen, and wild I pressed my palm against the cool stone, feeling the vibration of water straining behind it. The dam was more than a wall. It was leverage, it was power, and I had built it stronger than they could imagine. The thought crystallized clear as the stars that pierced through the storm clouds overhead. They had ordered it down, they had demanded compliance, and maybe compliance was exactly what I should give them, only not in the way they expected. I stood in the wet grass, heart pounding, no longer a victim, no longer pleading. I would not fight their rules with reason. I would use their rules against them. The dam was mine, but its destruction would be theirs. And when the water came down, it would not just carve through earth, it would carve through pride, through arrogance, through Claudia herself. The storm had only just begun. I did not move against the dam right away. Patience was sharper than fury, and I wanted every cut to land with precision. So I let time work for me. I stopped clearing branches. I stopped patching weak spots. I watched debris pile high against the stone, watched soil erode. At the edges, the structure began to look neglected, fragile, though I knew its core was still strong enough to hold until I decided otherwise. While the water gathered its strength, I gathered my neighbors' doubts. I slipped copies of the violation letters into their mailboxes, the words bold and undeniable, the board ordering me to dismantle the dam. Immediately whispers grew louder on porches and sidewalks, questions carried on the wind. If he takes it down, won't our street flood? Didn't his dam save us last spring? The seed of fear took root, and for the first time Claudia's certainty began to crack. She responded as I knew she would, with arrogance. Her voice thundered through the next meeting. His dam is a liability. If it fails, it is his fault, not ours. He alone is responsible. The board nodded their heads, blind, loyal soldiers, repeating her decree, but her words traveled beyond the room. They slipped into kitchens and garages and lingered in the ears of every homeowner who lived downhill from me and from her. I could feel the neighborhood turning, not fast enough to save me from her legal war, but enough to prepare the ground for what would come next. All I needed was the right storm. I rented a backhoe under a name not my own, parking it under a tarp near the Trillium. The machine waited silent, like a predator in the dark. Every day I checked the forecast, scanning the horizon for thunder, and when it finally came, it was not gentle. It was a wall of black sky, heavy with rain, lightning, splitting the clouds open, as if the heavens themselves wanted to see justice. I called Claudia as the first sheets of water slammed against my windows. Her voice dripped with triumph when she answered, calling to surrender. "No," I said, steady, calm. "Call and comply. Watch closely." I pulled the tar from the backhoe. Its engine roared to life, drowning out the storm's fury. I drove it toward the dam, the ground quaking under its weight. Neighbors appeared from their houses, their umbrellas. Useless their phones raised to record their voices, carrying fear and awe as I lowered the steel bucket into the earth. Claudia arrived in her shining SUV, her headlights cutting through the rain. She stumbled out, pearls glinting even in the storm, her hair plastered to her face, her mascara running black. She screamed, "What are you doing? Stop!" I pointed at her across the roaring water. "I'm obeying your orders. You wanted the dam gone. Now it will be gone." With one final thrust, the wall cracked. The river exploded for a surge of water bursting free. With the rage of years, it tore through lawns, fences, decks. The flood raced downhill. Unstoppable neighbors screamed and scrambled to higher ground. The torrent charged toward Claudia's, called to sack her perfect world, dissolving into mud and chaos. She stood frozen, her mouth open in horror as the water swallowed her driveway and climbed her porch steps, her kingdom drowning in the very force she had mocked. She spun toward me, but her words were lost in the roar of the flood. The neighbors turned their fury not on me, but on her, their voices cut to the storm sharp in the rain. "You forced this. You said it had to go. This is on you." Claudia's face drained the color her authority, washed away in the torrent she had unleashed without lifting a finger. Her empire was collapsing before her very eyes, and I stood in the rain, soaked to the bone, watching the justice unfold. The flood was not only water, it was revelation, it was every insult, every threat, every smug laugh returned to her tenfold. And as the torrent carved through her perfect cul-de-sac, I knew this was not the end, but the beginning of her downfall. The morning after the flood, the neighborhood looked like a battlefield, driveways buried under mud lawns, shredded by the torn furniture dripping on sidewalks. As families dragged out what they could say, fire trucks idled at the corners, their lights flashing red against the gray sky. And in the center of it all, Claudia stood, trembling, mascara streaked across her cheeks, pearls dangling like broken promises. She tried to hold herself like the queen she had always pretended to be, but her crown had washed away with the water. She pointed at me, her voice hoarse and cracked. "He destroyed the dam. He caused this disaster. Arrest him." But no one moved. The neighbors surrounded her, their faces twisted with fury and betrayal. A man shouted, "You ordered him to tear it down." We all saw the letters. A woman raised her phone screen, glowing with Claudia's signature beneath the demand that the structure be removed. Others lifted their devices to dozens of recordings, dozens of copies of the very threat she had laughed about at the meetings. Claudia's lips trembled. "No, this is his fault. He is lying." But the words rang hollow, drowned beneath the chorus of voices calling her a fraud, a tyrant, a destroyer. By nightfall, the videos had already spread across every corner of the internet. Headlines bloomed like wildfire. HOA president floods her own neighborhood. Memes appeared showing Claudia with captions like, "Protecting property values by sinking them," her once polished image shredded in hours. The same neighbors who once feared her now mocked her with glee. Insurance companies arrived. Next, their suits pressed, their clipboards sharp. They asked questions that cut deeper than any accusation. Why had the dam been ordered down despite evidence? It prevented flooding. Why had warnings been ignored? Claudia's voice faltered, her excuses flimsy against the paper trail she herself had built. The board fractured. Members resigned to escape. The sinking ship lawsuits piled one after another like waves breaking on the shore. And Claudia, the woman who had ruled with pearls and smirks and threats, found herself buried under debts, legal fees, and public humiliation. I walked the ruined street, the smell of wet plaster and mold heavy in the air. Neighbors who once whispered behind curtains now nodded at me with quiet gratitude. None said aloud, but their eyes told the story. They knew I had not been the villain. I had been the hand that revealed the truth. Claudia stood on her porch, her house, gutted carpets, ruined furniture, swollen with water. She looked smaller, now fragile, her hands clutching the railing, as though it were the only thing keeping her upright, her eyes hollow when they met mine. I stopped at the edge of her yard, mud sucking at my boots, and raised a hand. In a small wave, my voice steady. "Should have let me keep the dam." Her mouth opened, then closed, nothing left to say. The queen dethroned, the empire gone. I turned and walked away, the sound of water still rushing through the broken streets, but softer now, gentler, as if the storm had finished its work. The dam was gone, and with it the illusion of her power. Justice had not come in a courtroom nor in a boardroom. It had come roaring down like the flood itself, merciless, unstoppable, washing away arrogance, and leaving only truth in its place. And for the first time in months, I felt peace. The fight was over, and I had won.